Welcome back to another episode of Behind Beliefs and Behaviors, Getting to the Root Cause with yours truly, Dr. Maiysha. I wanted to record a quick segment about what's behind me starting a whole new podcast. So there are some of you who will be listening right now who have been following me for a while, who know that this is my, in fact, fourth podcast. Now, what I'll say about it being the fourth is that the very first podcast, no, actually, in fact, this is my fifth podcast. So while this is my third, I would say, podcast in this format, this is actually my fifth show. And so what is behind me starting on an entirely new podcast again? For those of you who have been following me for years and years and years, you may know that I actually had a show called The Wellness Blueprint. And that show was a radio show back on Blog Talk Radio back in 2008. I cannot believe it was so many years ago. And during that time, I wanted to talk all about wellness and the root cause of wellness. You might be hearing a theme, especially if you listen to my podcast, the podcast episode just before this. And so I did that episode with a co-host, and if the Blog Talk Radio still exists, you may still be able to find it. And then I went on hiatus for a couple of years and was asked by a good friend of mine who unfortunately is no longer with us, Clark Garrison. He was the owner of Survival 365 Radio and asked me if I would bring the Wellness Blueprint back on the air. And so I reached out to a friend of mine who at the time was a transitioning attorney, who is now the Reverend Dr. Elliot Robinson. And we brought the Wellness Blueprint back, and that show ran for 7 years on the Blog Talk Radio platform. And when we decided to sunset that, we decided to sunset it because it just felt like it had come to completion. You know how sometimes when you are engaging in some activity, or you have work, or whatever it is that you're engaging in, and you come to this point of satisfaction and you feel like, it's done, it's complete. And many times people don't necessarily honor that completion. They might try to push past it, or maybe they think something is wrong, or maybe they think maybe they've lost their mojo. But sometimes you come to a point where things feel complete. And what I want to say about that is it's really okay to honor completion, especially when you've been doing something for a long time and you're continuing to evolve and grow. And so the podcast, or the radio show, which essentially was a form of a podcast, came to its completion. We said goodbye. We sunset it. Of course, Reverend Elliot and I are still friends today, but it was a journey, and that journey came to an end. Well, I took a bit of a break, and people kept telling me, well, you need to start a podcast. And after some resistance and some time, I started the Next Level Physicians Thriving Outside the Box, because that was where I was at the time. I was helping physicians create meaningful careers, thrive outside of the traditional status quo box of practicing clinical medicine in the traditional way. And so I started a podcast that amplified and lifted up those physicians, and eventually spread it out to not just physicians, but healthcare professionals who were thriving outside of the box. Once again, after some time of growth, I think that podcast was on maybe for about 3 or 4 seasons. I came into my career transition, my next career transition, which is what I do now. And that is I train and help people to really look to see what's behind their beliefs. And at the time when I started the Black Mind Garden, which was my most recent podcast prior to this one, I really was and still am, but at this time, very much committed to bringing a very specific message to a very specific audience. You know, as a person who, as a trainer in neurolinguistic programming and trauma and unconscious mind work, it is very important to help people who occupy marginalized identities, and particularly Black men and women, to really get that we have choices, and we can heal those traumas and those unresourceful, limiting beliefs that we've inherited, that have been passed down through generations. And the Black Mind Garden was sort of my love letter to the people in my community, that I see you and we can heal, and we can heal together. And to be able to bring in these tools about the unconscious mind, these tools of neurolinguistic programming, these tips on how you can begin to utilize these in your parenting, in your work, in your leadership, in your community. And again, I'm a trainer of this work, and that's what I was doing at the time, bringing this work to my specific community, the African American community, and helping us heal from all the trauma that we're experiencing. Now, do I still do that? Absolutely. But my role has shifted and expanded into more of a globally corporate environment. And so my message has shifted, and the work that I want to do to heal people who are in those marginalized identities, and even in it, particularly and especially inside of the African American Black community, it is helping them on a larger level by doing the work inside of organizations. And so one of the reasons that I have decided to start this Behind Beliefs and Behaviors podcast is because I want to talk about the work that I do in a much larger and global context. Will I still talk about how this work applies in parenting? Absolutely. Will I still talk about how it applies in personal life and relationships? Yes. And I can expand the message to a larger and wider audience and begin to talk more about leadership and society and the world, and really have people who are running these larger organizations in leadership positions who can relate, to be able to apply this work, and for me to be able to lift up and elevate the voices that may not be heard inside of those larger organizations. So you ask, why am I starting this new podcast? Well, the Black Mind Garden, as much as I love it, has served its purpose. For 4 seasons, it's been there. It lives. It will continue to live. And now there's an opportunity to expand my voice and to continue to impact the communities that I want to impact from a different place. And so the journey, that journey has come to an end, and a new journey is beginning. And I invite you to join me on this journey. The content will be similar and will be expansive. I will do still solo podcasts, and I will do guest podcasts. So I invite you to go ahead and subscribe and leave a review on this podcast. Let me know what you thought about it. What do you think about this journey? And I look forward to seeing you on the next episode of Behind Beliefs and Behaviors.